You're just playing Soldier Emma. Real heroes don't make a fuss about being medics. That's what my mother snapped the last time I went home. The word medic tasted bitter on her tongue as if saying it was a disappointment. But I wore my uniform anyway. Not to argue, not to prove anything, but because I earned every inch of it. Every stripe, every badge, every hidden scar beneath this crisp fabric. My name is Emma Reynolds. I'm 40 now, a former combat medic in the U.S. Army. These days, I teach emergency trauma care at the VA hospital in Denver, but none of that seems to matter back at my parents' house. There, I'm still the awkward daughter who never belonged, the girl who dropped out of ballet, the tomboy who preferred muddy boots to party shoes, the woman who never married, the one who never gave them a grandchild. The family dinner always felt like a battlefield with me, the outsider. Have you ever sat at a table surrounded by relatives and felt invisible? Forced to fake a smile while every bite tastes like rejection, because they never see you as enough. Before I go on, please hit subscribe, like, and comment with where you're watching from. And the time there right now. This story might sound unreal, but every detail is etched into me like shrapnel. It starts last Thanksgiving. The old farmhouse still had that sagging porch and paint peeling like it did when I was a child. I parked down the gravel road, careful not to block my brother's shiny new pickup. As I stepped out, my boots hit the earth with that familiar solid sound. The cold air crept into my coat, chilling my skin before I even reached the door. The welcome mat faded and torn, still red. Bless this mess. I knocked, not because I had to, but because they needed the time. Time to brace themselves. Time to remind each other to be civil. Dad opened the door. His eyes immediately flicked to my uniform. "You're not in the field anymore, Emma. You don't have to wear that here." No hello. No how was the trip. Just that. Inside the house smells like cinnamon rolls and quiet judgment. My mother's arms wrap around me, but it's stiff like she's hugging a stranger. "You're early," she mutters without looking me in the eyes. My brother Derek strides in all 6 feet of polished success, dressed in a designer sweater that looks like it cost more than my entire uniform. He slaps a hand on my shoulder, his grin smug. "Still playing Army girl, huh?" I force a smile and take my seat at the dinner table right beside the empty chair marked with a folded name card, Sergeant E. Reynolds. Not Emma, not daughter. Just a rank. A placeholder. The meal is turkey mashed potatoes and silence so thick it's almost choking. Every time I open my mouth, someone cuts me off. Derek talks about his newest tech startup full of buzzwords and IPO dreams. Mom drones on about her Pilates class and how her instructor is so motivating. Dad recounts for the 5th time the story of meeting a retired senator at the golf club, acting as if it's a headline. I try to share a story about a girl I saved in Syria last year. She was 7, orphaned by a missile strike. I carried her 2 miles through rubble and darkness to a makeshift clinic. Her name was Layla. She smiled at me through broken ribs. But before I can get to the part where the explosion hit, Mom interrupts with a sharp cough. "Let's not talk about bombs at the dinner table. It's Thanksgiving." I fall silent. Even the cranberry sauce feels like it's watching me. Later, I slip into the backyard, the same yard I ran barefoot through as a kid. The stars are dim, and my breath puffs in the cold night air. Hands shoved deep in my pockets, I wonder why I keep coming back. Then laughter spills out from inside, warm, easy, and free from guilt. That's when it hits me. I'm not really one of them. I'm the ghost of the girl they once knew, wrapped in a uniform they'll never truly respect. But I don't cry. I don't yell. I just stand there, still silent, like the medic I trained to be. Observing breathing, waiting for the right moment. That night, I sleep in the guest room with the twin bed and bare walls. It smells like lemon cleaner and distance. I lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about Layla, wondering if she still remembers my name. No one here does. Morning comes without a word of apology. Mom avoids my eyes. Dad leaves early for the golf course. Derek slips out without a goodbye. I sit on the bed, staring at my hands. These are the same hands that have closed arteries pulled men from wreckage-stitched wounds as bullets flew. But here, they're just hands. Idle, unwanted, irrelevant. I pack up my things in silence. The zipper on my duffel bag snaps shut with a finality that settles deep in my bones. I glance back at the house one last time, but it barely seems to notice my departure. And then I hear it. My own voice, soft as a ghost, whispering, "You came looking for something you already built without them." That day, I drive straight back to base. I don't look back, because sometimes home isn't the place you're born. It's the place where you bleed, where you're seen, and where you matter. The day I stopped crying wasn't when they broke me. It was when I realized they never truly had that power. Not really. See, I didn't grow up poor. I grew up invisible. We had the house, the yard, and a golden retriever named Rascal. Yes, that dumb name. What we didn't have was room for more than one bright future. Derek, my older brother, claimed that spotlight the moment he threw his first perfect spiral in 3rd grade. He was the golden boy, high school quarterback, accepted early to Stanford. From the mailman to our church pastor, everyone called him the next big thing. My parents. They didn't just support him. They orbited him. They planned meals around his games, vacations, around his training. My childhood spent in the bleachers clutching a pom-pom. I never wanted cheering for someone who never once met my eyes. I, on the other hand, preferred bugs to dolls, took apart radios, and buried myself in books about anatomy and battlefield medicine, while other kids practiced cheer routines. Once I told my parents I wanted to be a field medic. My father laughed. Mom blinked, then said, "You mean like a nurse?" "No," I said, burning with teenage fire. "A combat medic. I want to serve. I want to save lives." She looked at me like I'd said I wanted to be a magician, then asked if I'd thought about cosmetology school instead. From that moment on, every talk felt like a warning. "Don't waste your looks," she'd say. "Who'd marry someone who gets shot at for a living? Stop being so dramatic, Emma." But it wasn't drama. It was clarity. I enlisted on my 18th birthday. No announcements, no goodbye dinners, just an application left on the kitchen counter in a spotless bedroom. Mom didn't call, Dad didn't write, Derek sent a 2-word text. Why still I never cried. Not even in boot camp when my muscles screamed and my bunkmates puked beside me. Not even during training when I jammed my fingers into a soldier's simulated chest wound, staying calm as he screamed in pain. Not even the first time I heard real gunfire crack overhead in a country I couldn't even find on a map. Because every time I felt like breaking down, I thought about that house, that dinner table, that suffocating silence. If I cried now, they'd win. So I sharpened myself, hardened my skin, tuned my focus. I rose through the ranks not because I was fearless, but because I understood what it meant to be ignored. When no one listens, you get really good at paying attention. I learned to read faces in a heartbeat, to hear pain behind bravado, and to reach out when everyone else pulled away. It made me a damn good medic. Once during my 2nd deployment to Afghanistan, our convoy hit an IED. 3 died instantly. The rest were scattered, bleeding, screaming, broken. I crawled on my belly through the chaos to a soldier named Alvarez, whose leg dangled by sinew and desperate prayers. He was 19. He kept whispering, "Don't tell my mom. Don't tell my mom." I held his hand, pressing the wound, whispering back, "She'll hear from you herself." He made it, because I didn't flinch, because I didn't cry. I cried later. Alone, in the dark. But even then, the tears weren't for the blood. They were for finally becoming someone real, someone my family would never see, because they'd already decided who I was. Years later, on a brief leave, I came home for a week to see if maybe something had changed. Derek had a new promotion, a new wife, and a baby on the way. He greeted me like a wedding caterer who showed up too early. Dad asked if I still worked with those soldier people. Mom said, "You look tired, dear. You should try some eye cream." I didn't unpack my bag. I stayed 2 nights in the guest room and left without saying goodbye. And I didn't cry, because that was the moment I understood. Some people only see who you were, not who you've become. And even knowing that, even carrying that weight, I kept going back. Why? Because some broken parts of us still crave healing, even when we know better. There's a rhythm to war you don't expect. It's not all smoke and screams. It's the silence in the tent at 2 a.m. when the bleeding stops and the soft beep of the monitor is all you hear. It's the sound of breath, the kind you're not sure will return, filling a chest torn open just minutes before. It's the click of your own jaw clenched so tight you forget what it means to rest. But somewhere in that chaos you begin to feel. Not the safe, scripted kind of feeling you see in movies. No, real feeling. The kind that shatters old walls you thought you'd buried back home. The kind that reminds you you're still human. Despite everything. That's what war gave me. That's what my family never could. A reason to feel without apology. My third deployment was the hardest, not because of the enemy, but because of who I'd become. By then, I had 3 commendations. I could tie a 2-minute tourniquet in the dark. I knew how to triage a field injury before my commanding officer barked an order, but it wasn't until Fallujah that I earned my ghost. We'd been called to support a civilian convoy that had taken a wrong turn into an ambush zone. Chaos reigned. Flames licked the sky. Mothers screamed. Children crawled beneath twisted metal. One of my team leaders was shot in the hip, but still tried to direct others with a jagged piece of rebar lodged in his thigh. And then I saw her. A girl, maybe 10 years old, lying face down near an overturned car, her small hand limp and twisted. I didn't think. I didn't ask. I didn't wait for orders. I ran. Bullets danced past me like angry insects, hot, sharp, and hissing. I slid beside her knees, scraping on broken glass and gravel. She was breathing, barely. A shard of shrapnel was embedded deep in her abdomen. I pressed down hard, screaming for backup. My comms crackled with static. No response. So I lifted her, all 25 pounds of her, and I ran. Across 2 blocks of hellfire, through alleys smelling of diesel and despair, to a safe house where 2 stunned Marines waited with an empty stretcher. They stared like I was crazy, but I got her there, alive. Then I collapsed. When I woke, I was in a hospital bed. Concussion. 2 fractured ribs, 22 stitches across my side. The commander who came to see me didn't say, "Thank you." He said, "Next time, wait for the order." But the girl lived. She was reunited with her aunt 3 days later. They brought her by to see me before I was transferred out. She handed me a lollipop and whispered in broken English, "You are brave." That was the first time I let a child see me cry, because in that moment, she was the only person in the world who saw me without conditions, without context, without disappointment, just brave. My mother never knew, never asked. When I told her I'd been injured, she said, "Well, maybe that's a sign you should come home and do something safer." Like teach. She said it like I'd been playing dodgeball in traffic. Like this was a phase I'd outgrow. Like medals could be returned at a refund counter when I grew tired of bleeding. But war changed me. Not into someone cold, but into someone clear. Clear about what mattered. Clear about who I could trust. Clear that I didn't need my family's pride to survive. Because I had learned something far greater, how to save a life. And in doing that, I quietly saved my own. Still, sometimes I wish they would ask. Ask what it felt like to pull someone from death. Ask why I kept going back. Ask if I was scared. Ask if I was proud. But silence was easier for them. Pretending I was still the girl who didn't smile enough, who didn't act feminine enough, who didn't belong in the perfect storybook they were building around Derek and his flawless family. So I stopped trying, until one day a letter arrived. Not handwritten, not warm, a typed invitation, white cardstock, silver embossing, formal and cold, Derek's wedding, location Napa, black tie, RSVP required. But what stopped me wasn't the lack of warmth. It was the name on the envelope. Sergeant Emma Reynolds. No dear, no sis. Just rank, just the rank. As if my title was the only way they could place me now. I stared at that envelope for an hour. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew what they were really saying. We'll let you be seen, but not really seen. We'll include you, as long as you behave. Don't wear your uniform. Don't talk about your past. Don't make it awkward. I placed the invitation down gently and said to the empty room, I'll go. But not for them. I arrived at the wedding like a storm wrapped in silk. My dress uniform was sharp enough to cut glass. Polished boots, medals pinned, hair in a regulation bun. Not a costume, not a rebellion. Just the truth of who I am. When I stepped out of the rental car, the valet hesitated. His eyes flicked to my ribbons, then back to my face. He said, "Thank you for your service." That quick, uncertain tone people use when they don't know what to do with women in uniform. I nodded. "You're welcome," and walked into the lion's den. The venue was a winery bathed in honey-colored light. Vines curled around white columns. A string quartet played a chamber piece I couldn't name. It was beautiful, elegant, designed more for photos than feelings. Inside it smelled of money and lavender. My boots clicked against imported stone tile. Heads turned. Some stared too long. Some looked away too fast. Then I heard my mother. "Oh, you wore that." She was in a pale gray gown, pearls at her neck. Her face stretched tight from years of ignoring emotion. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't see a dress code that excluded national service," I said calmly. She flinched, just slightly, then recovered. "Well, we just didn't want to draw too much attention. It's Derek's day, after all." Of course, wouldn't want a decorated war veteran pulling focus from the guy with a software startup and veneers. My father walked over. He said nothing about my uniform, just nodded and handed me a drink I didn't ask for. Then the bride's mother, someone I'd never met before, leaned in close and whispered as if I were a museum exhibit. "I heard you're a doctor of some kind. So noble. We were just saying how wonderful it is that Derek's sister could make it all the way out here." I gritted my teeth and smiled politely. "I'm not a doctor," I corrected her. "I'm a combat medic." She blinked, hesitating before asking, "Oh, like an army nurse?" My smile didn't falter. "No, like a medic who runs through open fire to treat gunshot wounds holding pressure with one hand and a rifle in the other." Her face went pale. I took a sip of my drink and excused myself. The ceremony was held outdoors. Rows of white chairs faced a wooden arch wrapped in fresh white roses. I sat in the second row next to an empty seat. No one beside me made small talk. They all knew who I was. They just didn't know what to do with that truth. When the music swelled and Derek walked down the aisle, he glanced in my direction. Not a smile, just a flicker of discomfort. Like he was trying to figure out if I was going to say something, ruin something. Remind everyone that their golden boy once called his sister an angry little girl with a soldier fetish. But I said nothing. I hadn't come for revenge. That didn't mean I came quietly either. At the reception, I found myself cornered by a cluster of cousins. One nudged my shoulder and asked, "So, like what do you actually do?" Like day to day, I gave a precise answer. I triage trauma cases in war zones. I prioritize who gets saved first. I stop bleeding with my bare hands. I've memorized the human skeletal system in 4 languages. And when I'm not doing that, I teach younger medics how not to die while doing the same. Their jaws dropped, and then one laughed. "Damn. Okay, I thought you were just like angry all the time. But that's kind of badass." I nodded. "It is. I didn't owe them softness, but I gave them honesty." Then came the part no one planned for: a tap on my shoulder. I turned and saw a man in full dress blues, flanked by Secret Service agents. He was older, with tired eyes and broad shoulders, and a voice every American has heard at some point during a national address. The Commander-in-Chief. I blinked, stunned. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. If this story has touched you, don't forget to subscribe and join me. There's so much more ahead, and you won't want to miss what happens next. He extended his hand and said, "You're Sergeant Emma Reynolds." I replied, "Yes, sir." His grip was firm, holding my hand longer than protocol demanded. Then in front of my entire family, he declared, "I've read your file. You've saved more lives than any general I know. I've wanted to meet you for a long time." The air left my lungs. I didn't hear the clinking of champagne glasses or see the frozen expressions around me. All I could feel was my pulse pounding in my throat and my mother's breath catching just behind me. The president turned to the crowd, smiled warmly, and added, "She didn't just serve. She transformed how we train for wartime triage. Because of her, the survival rate for combat injuries increased by nearly 40% in some zones. That's not just brave, it's genius under fire." He spoke like it was a blessing, and I stood there in my uniform, stark against the pastel silks and elegant dresses around me. I nodded, not because I needed praise, but because I needed them to hear it from someone they couldn't ignore. The president posed for a photo with me and told me to expect a call soon. There was a position opening at the National Health Policy Task Force. Then he left, just like that. But the silence that followed was anything but empty. It was crushing. When I turned around, I saw my father staring at the floor, my brother's mouth slightly agape, and my mother's trembling hands, with lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. But it was too late for words. Sometimes silence says everything. People say, you remember moments that split your life into before and after. For me, it wasn't the bomb. It wasn't the body. It wasn't the blood that wouldn't stop. It was the order and the fact that I disobeyed it. It happened in Kandahar 6 months before Derek's wedding. We were embedded with a joint NATO unit tasked with clearing a supply route that had become a hotbed for ambushes. I was the lead medic, not because I outranked anyone, but because they trusted me. I had the experience, the scars, the calm. We received intelligence about a suspected IED beneath an abandoned fruit stand on the roadside. My commanding officer ordered a drone pass. Nothing triggered, so we moved forward. Then everything exploded. The convoy behind us erupted in flames. The shockwave tossed our Humvee sideways metal, groaning like a wounded animal. My head slammed against the window. Everything blurred, red, blackness. When I came to, I was upside down. Our driver was dead. The gunner lay unconscious beside me. The lieutenant was pinned beneath the twisted metal, bleeding from a deep gash across his thigh. Smoke burned my lungs as I crawled through the shattered door. Flames painted the sand orange and screams cut through the chaos. Beyond the ridge, I heard the sharp, unmistakable crack of rifle fire. It wasn't just an IED, it was an ambush. I radioed for backup, but the comms were jammed silent. Then I spotted the second vehicle charred and gutted, its roof peeled back like tinfoil. Behind it, a third Humvee, where 2 soldiers were dragging something or someone into cover. And then I heard it. A child, crying. Not wailing or screaming, just that high-pitched sob of confusion and terror that slices through the smoke like a blade. Negative barked my commanding officer through the static. Do not approach civilians. Unknown threats, we're blind. Hold your position until air support arrives. But I couldn't hold, because through the flames I saw her. A girl, maybe 8 years old, curled behind an overturned crate, blood streaking down her face. She clutched something wrapped in tattered cloth, a baby. I knew the protocol. I knew the risk. I knew the danger. But I also knew this. If I didn't move, they would die. So I ran. I crossed 150 meters of open terrain, dodging flying metal shards, searing heat, and deafening chaos. A bullet tore through the strap of my medpack. Another exploded the sand beside my foot. My breath burned like fire. My heart pounded so loudly I couldn't hear anything else. I reached the girl, dropped to my knees, and used my body as a shield. I checked the infant first. Alive, but weak and malnourished. The girl suffered minor burns and a fractured arm. I pulled them close, whispering in Pashto that they were safe, and radioed their coordinates to the evac chopper. No response. I wrapped them in my jacket and carried them to a downed Humvee. A private provided suppressing fire as I sprinted, lungs threatening to collapse. We made it. Both children survived. So did I. What didn't survive was my spotless record. When the dust settled and the reports were filed, I was called into the command tent. My commanding officer stood with arms folded, his voice cold as he said, "You disobeyed a direct order." I stared at him, unblinking. "Yes, sir. You jeopardized your team." "With respect, sir. No one else was moving. He sighed long and weary. You're not a hero, Sergeant. You're lucky. And we can't build protocol around luck. They issued a formal warning, not a demotion, but a mark. A quiet suggestion whispered through the ranks. She's not obedient. She's unpredictable. But I also received a note, folded neatly in half, placed on my bunk while I was in the shower. It read, "Because of you, there are 2 fewer graves in this country. Thank you. No name. Just a fingerprint smudged with dried blood in the corner." Later, I would learn that the footage of that rescue, captured from a helmet cam, had made its way up the chain of command. Shown in a secure briefing room in Washington, D.C., people watched in stunned silence. Someone important whispered, "Find her." But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was the look in the girl's eyes as I pressed a bandage to her leg. Raw. Pure. The kind of look you can't fake. The kind I had never seen in my own mother's eyes. When I returned to stateside, I told my family nothing. Not about the rescue, not about the reprimand, not about the faint scar on my side where shrapnel grazed me as I ran. They wouldn't have cared. At best, my father would grunt something about recklessness. My mother might say, "Isn't that what you signed up for?" Derek wouldn't say a word at all, so I stayed silent. Because by then, I knew their approval wasn't a currency I needed. But deep down, a part of me hoped someone out there had noticed. "They said your presence would ruin the photo." That's what my mother whispered when I arrived at the rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding. I hadn't even taken off my coat. "You're wearing that again," she added, eyes flicking to my uniform like it was a cigarette burn on silk. I stood still quiet, like I'd been trained to under pressure. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. But I did say, "I'm not here for the photo." She pursed her lips. "Could you maybe wear something more neutral tomorrow? Something less intense?" My mother whispered the night before the wedding, like I was a bomb, like I might go off during the family toast. I nodded slowly, then said, "My uniform is neutral. It's the most honest thing I own." And with that, I walked away. The wedding day itself was picture perfect. Golden sunlight bathed the venue. Rows of guests sat neatly arranged, their smiles curated like they were modeling for a lifestyle blog. No one would guess the undercurrent of tension, the silent shame pulsing just beneath the surface. I sat again in the second row beside the same empty seat. The silence was familiar, but this time I wasn't alone in it. Even though my mother had tried to move me for symmetry and Derek barely made eye contact since my arrival, I could feel eyes shifting around the room. Guests from other branches of the family, people who knew enough, people who had read the small stories tucked away in the back pages of military journals, people who had watched the president shake my hand just 24 hours before. Yes, that happened. The commander-in-chief hadn't just greeted me. He stood beside me during the reception. He raised his glass and spoke loudly and proudly about my service, about my contributions to battlefield medicine, my role in saving lives, changing protocols, and rewriting manuals that would train generations of medics after me. My family didn't know where to look. My mother blinked rapidly. My father stared down at his drink. Derek looked like he wanted to leave his own wedding. And me, I stood there, not smiling, not smug, just still. Because this wasn't vindication, it was truth, spoken aloud in a room that had tried to bury it. Later, as the music began and the lights dimmed, people approached me. Strangers, great uncles I hadn't spoken to since grade school, a bridesmaid who whispered that her brother was in the Navy and asked if she could shake my hand. A young server said, "Ma'am, I want to be like you someday. I'm joining the reserves after graduation." They all saw me, not the problem. Not the inconvenience, not the too intense sister in boots, but a woman who had done something, carried blood and hope across borders and brought people back from the brink. Eventually, the photographer announced it was time for the formal family photo. I began to step away, not out of bitterness, but habit. That's when I heard him, the photographer, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Excuse me, miss. Are you the soldier we need you front and center?" I froze. All eyes turned toward me. My mother's mouth opened, likely to object, but then she stopped herself. Because at that moment, the president, who had stayed longer than planned, stepped forward again. He gestured toward me and said with a grin, "I think this family's most decorated member belongs right in the middle, don't you?" It was like time folded in on itself. Me, the girl who was always pushed to the end of the table. Me, the one no one asked about her day. Me, whose name never made fridge magnets or varsity jackets. Now standing front and center, framed by the very people who once pretended I didn't exist. As the camera clicked, I didn't think about medals or accolades. I thought about Layla. I thought about Alvarez. I thought about the little girl I carried through fire, her baby brother wrapped tightly in my jacket. And then I felt something unexpected. Not pride, not revenge, peace. Because I wasn't proving anything anymore. I had already lived it. When the photo session ended, my mother approached me slowly. She looked down at the ground, then at my boots. Her hand reached out, hesitant, trembling, and touched mine. I didn't know she whispered. I answered gently, "You never asked?" She nodded. Just once, a quiet concession. Not an apology, but a beginning. That night, I stood alone on the villa's balcony, watching the wind ripple through the grapevines like an endless, indifferent ocean. Inside, laughter floated through the windows. Polished, elegant, carefully edited joy. But I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. Because something had shifted. Not entirely in them, but in me. A cousin I barely remembered joined me. He offered me a glass of water, not wine. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, "I used to think you were just angry." I looked at him. I was. He nodded as if that somehow helped him understand. "But I get it now," he said softly. "It's hard. Being told you don't belong in your own family." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He didn't say anything else, just placed a hand gently on my shoulder and went back inside. That small gesture, more than the president's words, more than the speeches or the photos, reminded me that sometimes recognition doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it's just the quiet shift when someone finally sees you, truly sees you, whole, as you are. In the days that followed, messages began pouring in from relatives, from guests, even from strangers who'd seen the story circulate in local news. President honors war hero at private ceremony. I hadn't posted the photo myself, but someone else had, and it spread quickly. Suddenly, people were asking questions, curious about combat medics, about triage training, about how one woman changed survival rates in modern war zones without ever firing a single bullet. My inbox filled with young women wanting to enlist, nurses asking how to transition to field work, mothers seeking advice on how to prepare their daughters for a world that doesn't always welcome strength wrapped in femininity. And somewhere in there was a message from Derek. Just 2 words, "I'm sorry." I didn't reply, not because I hadn't forgiven him, but because forgiveness doesn't always need an audience. Weeks later, I sat in a classroom at Walter Reed, watching a new group of recruits struggle to tie pressure bandages with trembling hands. One young man looked up and said, "Ma'am, you're the one from that video, right? The one with the kids?" I smiled. "Yes," I said. "But I'm also the one who's going to fail you if you keep wrapping that gauze like it's a Christmas present." The class laughed, and so did I, not politely or stiffly, but a full, real laugh that cracked open something I hadn't realized was still healing. One night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my dress uniform. I hadn't worn it since the wedding. The metal still shimmered in the dim light, the fabric still held the scent of ceremony and sweat. But now, it wasn't just a symbol of who I'd become in spite of my family. It was who I chose to be because of what they couldn't see. And yet I thought about my mother's trembling hand lingering in mine as if she didn't want to let go. As if part of her finally saw that I hadn't ruined anything, I'd just refused to disappear. The truth is, I don't need to be at the center of the photo. I don't need the headlines. I don't even need the medals. What I needed and what I'd been chasing was to know I wasn't worthless. And I got that not from the people I was born to, but from the lives I touched. From the little girl in Syria who gave me a lollipop. From the soldier who bled out in my arms and whispered, "Tell my wife I wasn't scared." From every quiet soul who saw me, not as too much or too hard, but just enough to make a difference. So now, when people ask who I am, I don't give them my title first. I say, I'm Emma. I'm 40. I've seen war-saved strangers and learned to live with silence. My family once called me worthless. But the commander-in-chief stood beside me, looked me in the eye, and said, "You saved more lives than any general I know." And I believe him. Because now, I believe me. If my story has touched you, I'd love to hear from you. Your support means more than you know, whether it's a kind word, a shared experience, or advice on how you faced your own battles. Life often tests us in unexpected ways, but what I've learned is that strength doesn't mean you have to do it alone. We all carry scars, visible or not, but those scars remind us of what we've overcome. So if you're facing your own challenges, remember this. Embrace your story, stand tall in your truth, and never let anyone else define your worth. Drop a comment, I'm listening.